Hi, and welcome to Model Railroad Academy. I'm Ron Marsh, your host for today, and today we're going to be talking about mocking up scenes on your model railroad layout. Now, whatever level of model railroading you do, whether you're a beginner building your very first layout, or whether you've been building layouts for many, many years, as we talk about adding realism to our model railroad layouts, scenery is a big part of that. Now, as we try to strive for a sense of realism, trying to recreate something that looks like it could really fit in the real world, we want to make scenes and scenery that look realistic as well. And to do that, it takes a certain amount of planning. Now, I know I have been guilty in the past myself of just kind of building scenic forms and beginning the process of building scenery without very much planning. And sometimes those come out looking really good, but sometimes they come out looking really unrealistic and cartoonish. And that's what we want to avoid. And the best way to do that is to kind of plan out our scenery before we build it, before we get it in place. And one way that I like to do that is to actually mock up the scenery before I make it permanent. I kind of like to draw out and get a sense of what I want in scenery before I even build my bench work. But then I can really get a sense of how it's going to look by mocking it up. And so that's exactly what I'm going to show you today. I'm in the process of mocking up a scene on a new section of my own layout, and I'm going to show you exactly how I go about doing that to try to see how the scenic forms are going to fit together, how the track interacts with the scenery, and the other live action parts of the layout. So we're going to zoom in back here behind me, and we're going to start there and work our way around this curve a little bit as I show you how I mock up some scenery for my model railroad layout. Now, to begin with, here on the end of this new section, I have what's going to be a farm scene. And I want you to notice all through this, I have laid down a little bit of cork roadbed, just half of the roadbed. It's not glued down. It's just there to help me get a sense of where the tracks are going to be and how they're going to interact with the scenic forms. And then I have some various thicknesses and layers of extruded foam in here. And again, these aren't glued down. I've just got them in place to kind of see how they fit. And by laying them out, I can see if I want to rearrange, if I want to reshape or do something a little bit different with any of those. Now, you can see here, I've been working on backdrops. I've put up my masonite backdrop. I've painted the sky, haze, and clouds on the backdrop. I also have a photo backdrop that I'm going to be using. Now, of course, the photo backdrop has sky on it. Ultimately, I'm going to be cutting all of that sky off and just using the tree line and the rocks and the background kind of photograph on my layout, and then using my painted backdrop for the sky. You can see here in this curve, this coved curve in the layout, I've built up a little bit of a hill. One of the things that's always helpful and that you want to do as much as possible is you want to have people looking up into the scene as they look back. It makes your layout look larger. It makes it look like you have a greater sense of distance if they're kind of looking up a hill as they go towards the back. If they're looking down, it always makes things look smaller and more unrealistic. So if anything, I want my layout level from front to back to be flat or slightly raising. And you can see how you'll be able to see all along here how I've kind of mocked up a little bit of an uphill grade on this scenery. Here at the end of this section of scenery where my new section of layout kind of meets my old section of layout, I'm going to put in this farm scene. And you see I have here just some kits set out that I'm planning to use. This farmhouse, this neat old weathered barn, and then I have a couple of sections of Bluford Shop's cornfields that I'm going to be painting and installing along the back, and that'll kind of help make the transition from the layout to the backdrop, which is something else we would talk about while we're talking about mocking up scenes, and that is we want to pay careful attention to that transition between the layout and the backdrop. You don't want to see that hard, harsh corner Even like here where I've got this foam, you just see a harsh corner where the layout meets this. We want to always hide that with something, whether it's trees or a cornfield or structures or other kinds of scenery. We want to do something that masks that hard corner, because hard corners are very unrealistic. We want to kind of give the sense that the horizon just fades off into the distance, and so we can hide that in a number of ways. And some of these hills will help us to do that a little bit too. So this area here, I'm going to mock up this farm scene, and I've kind of gotten a sense of how I want to do that. This foam, of course, here is just cut square at the moment. I'll be using hot wire tools at some point to gently make that a rolling hill that comes up to a flat plain where the cornfields are. And we'll be using the same hot tools to form all of this rough foam into hills eventually. Now, I'll slide these down just a little bit, and you can see this photo backdrop. Again, I'm only going to be using the trees and the rocks at the bottom, not the sky. But you can see this backdrop. Now, it is going to end at that point, but the backdrop just comes to a square end where it would transition. It could transition into another piece of backdrop. In my case, it's actually going to end there. So I'll have to come in here with a knife and cut this tree out to be kind of a tree shape down around here very carefully and gently to make it look like a realistic, believable tree where it's the last tree in a set of trees or in in the woods. And actually what I probably will do here, this tree is so much taller than everything else, I'll probably come down here where you see this little bit of sky that protrudes, and I'll probably cut my tree out here and down low, cut this bit off so that it's that realistic fading into the distance of these small trees. Now we're going to turn on around the corner here just a little bit, and you're going to see that I've got an area over here as I make the corner where I've got some distance behind the tracks and between the tracks and the hills that go up against the backdrop. And I've got a plan for this area here. You'll notice I've got this piece of road here. And this piece of road is actually, it's made out of styrene. It came off of an old layout that I had made many years ago. When I took the layout apart, I just pulled it off in case I ever wanted to use it. And what I use it for mostly is things like this, to mock up scenes, because it is exactly the right size for a good two-lane road. And so it's easy for me to just use to mock up. And in this area, I'm going to have a scene where there is a highway that runs, two-lane highway that runs on the far side of the tracks. Down the layout a little ways, it'll cross the tracks and actually go into a town that I've modeled. And I found a photograph that is kind of the inspiration for this scene here. And here is the photograph right here. And this is a photograph from the very part of the world that I'm modeling, which is north central Texas. And you can see here, there's no railroad tracks, but you can see the road on the low part of this scenery, and then the hills, the rocky kind of hills in the background, and the short trees, the mesquite in this particular case, scrubby trees. And that's what I'm trying to recreate in this area right here. So I'm using this piece of road just again as a mock-up. And I want you to notice here, these hills that I have cut out here out of just some low foam, to make some of those low hills like in the photograph. And my road on this end is going to come and disappear back behind these hills. Now, again, this is where planning is very important, because you'll notice on my photo background, there's a piece of white that is the border all the way around this commercial background. And for most of this area, I've got some foam hills that would cover that up. And if that was the case everywhere, I wouldn't even have to cut that off. I could just mount the photo backdrop as it is and leave that on. But here you can see that this part opens up, and I'm going to have to cut that white line off and drop my photo background all the way down to the backdrop in order to get a realistic transition there. And then we'll have to use some low shrubs or some static grass, something to mask that transition. Again, as I'm kind of mocking this up to get a sense, I've got my my roadbed here to represent my tracks, and I can see how my road is going to fit into this area. And here I've got quite a bit of space between the tracks and the road, and between the road and the beginning of this next hill. And this is just going to be a wild area. I'm going to put probably a lot of those mesquite trees in here. Some rocky terrain, and use some weedy looking static grass and other scenic materials in this area. As we move on down, we're going to see that the area between the tracks and the hill narrows. So there's going to be a little less space for that flat ground kind of scenery, but there's going to be more scenery on the hill. So let's take a look at that. As we come on down here, we see that I've got more of this stacked foam. These are, again, 1/2-inch bits of foam, and there's a transition to a little bigger hill down here, and ultimately there's a rock cut down there where the track will actually go through the backdrop to a helix that connects to the lower deck. But here we can see how this is going to come up to a little larger hill. It's going to be a fairly gradual incline. What I'll probably do is make it almost like some terraces. May even make some short rocky bluffs like we saw in that photograph here along this top terrace, or maybe this center terrace here, to create some visual interest. This would be a great place to put some models of some wildlife, maybe some deer, or if I could find them. Wild hogs are plentiful in this part of the world. That would make some interesting scenic interest. Maybe a trail out here and have some people walking or hiking. This isn't necessarily a recreational part of the world, but it wouldn't be unheard of to have some people hiking or walking through this area of the world. Now, I show all this, and here, I'll bring my highway in here, and you can see again, I've got a narrower space between the tracks and the road, but this bottom part of this hill will transition down all the way down to basically even with this flat ground here. So the hill going up away from the road will be fairly gentle at first and then get steeper as it goes up. Now, again, all of this planning is very important because it gives me a sense of being able to incorporate my tracks into the hills, into the other scenery in a very realistic way. If I had pulled these hills out too close and had the road right up against the tracks, that wouldn't look right. Or I may not even have room for my road at all if I didn't plan this out. Or if I had planned just this piece of hill way back here, I'd have an awful lot of flat scenic ground to try to fill and make look realistic in order to try to create and complete the scene, and it would be difficult to make that look realistic. So these are just some ways that I like to try to plan out the scenery on my layout. And one other thing that I can't really get the camera to, and I haven't got fully mocked up, but one thing to think about is if you're adding cast rocks for like rock cuts or rocky bluffs, be sure to think about the thickness of those cast rocks whenever you're planning your hills or other scenery. That's a mistake I've made once before. I ended up casting some rocks that I had to cut out and completely redo because I cast them a little too close to the tracks and my trains were going to run right into the side of the rocks. That's not something that we want. So make sure that you consider the thickness of cast rocks any place that you're going to use them as you're building your scenery. And again, as with anything on a model railroad layout, the more planning we do, the more likely we're going to come up with scenes and a finished product that we really like and are pleased with, and the less likely we're going to be to have to take things out and redo them a second or a third time. So I hope that that's helpful to you as you are building your layout and as you're considering scenery. Drawing out scenery, getting a sense of the type of scenery you want is very helpful early on as you're planning even your track plan or your bench work. But as you're getting ready to start building scenery, take some time to mock it up using foam like this, or even just some wadded paper and masking tape to create temporary hills. Mocking up structures to get a sense of what their size is and how they'll fit into a scene. It's very helpful, and I think you'll come up with much better scenes that are more realistic and that you'll be much more pleased with over time as you do.